It's important that you recognise that the real work of making a chart happens after you've made it, when you have to check if it makes any sense. And I hope you, looking at this chart, realise there are some bits that don't make sense. For example, do we believe that this Korea line, which is shooting up really high recycling, they stopped recycling for a couple of years, according to this, and then they carried on again? Amazing. Do we really believe that nobody was recycling in 1989, particularly when 1989 does not even have a label? What's going on there? There's other more subtle problems on this which are less obvious, but let's deal with what's happening first of all by looking at, well, if you click on a chart, you're usually popped into the Design tab, which turns up at the top here. If you're on the Home tab and you don't have those options, you need to click on Chart Tools and click on Design. I'm going to click on the Select Data option, and you can see that actually it's showing me quite a complicated looking page with a whole bunch of options about where the data is coming from. You can see the countries I've selected, and in this one the horizontal categories, you can see the years it is using. First things to notice though, I'm just going to move the chart over here so you can see it, is that it has ticked some blank horizontal labels, and there are some at the end. This might explain why we've got some issues at the beginning and end of our graph. So I don't want it to use data from 1989 because there isn't any. What's actually happening is that in column B, which I'm kind of hovering over now, and column C, they're part of the text fields, but when it's selected the entire row, it's picking up those two columns as possibly containing data. They actually don't, so I'm just going to untick those two to make it know that don't use anything from those columns. If I click OK, the graph is going to update itself. We should see something change over here. And you can see it's actually not including something before 1990 now, which is good. I should also check the other end though. So I clicked back on Select Data, and I've got two possible columns at the end which are nothing to do with it. You can see them highlighted on the screen over here. I know they're containing no data, so I'm just going to tell it to ignore those two as well. I actually don't think it's going to change the graph at this point, but that's probably good practice. Yeah, all it's done is it reduced a bit of white space at the end. There are still problems with this data. You know, why is it bumping up and down? Germany's doing another sort of recycling, not recycling, recycling like Korea did. Why is that happening? Let's have a quick look at that in the actual data. Let's look at the Korea data. So there's Korea, and you can see that along the way in the Korea row we've got lots of data, and then covered up by my graph at the moment is a little patch where no data was recorded for Korea. Now we have to be quite specific about how our data is written in this. So you will have noticed that when no data was recorded, they don't write 0. They've written these double dots, which I think is good practice. They've written that in to make it clear that they haven't just missed out a value or forgotten to type it in. There was nothing recorded, so they wrote this double dot business. This sort of thing is quite common, and it's different, for example, from if we look at the Estonia data, which is in this column. You can see there are actually zeros written in here, which indicated they recorded the data, but there was no recycling. And that's different from the double dot, which means they didn't record any data. So there's an important difference to recognize between no data and zero data. And Excel knows this. Unfortunately, there is a problem because it's interpreting anything which is not a number, like these double dots. It's thinking, I don't know what number that is, so I'll call it 0. It is not interpreting it as an empty cell, because if it was, we could use it. Have a look at this option. If you click on the chart, go to the Design tab and click on Select Data, you can see there is a hidden and empty cells button down here. This tells Excel how to deal with hidden or empty cells. Empty cells are what we're worried about here. And you can see that if there's an empty cell, it could interpret it as a gap. It could not plot any data for that. It could interpret it as a 0, which it looks like ours is already doing, or it could try and join points either side of the empty cell with a line in between. That's called interpolation. We'll talk about that in a bit. What I'd like to do for now is get it to show me a gap so it doesn't try and plot data which doesn't exist. Unfortunately, the double dots in our data are not being interpreted as empty cells. So let's fix that first. This sort of cleanup is painful, but it's an important part of handling your data. I'm going to use a find and replace function in Excel to make every cell which is actually empty or indicated as empty by writing a double dot in there. I'm going to turn that into an actual empty cell, so there's nothing written in it. It shouldn't change the zeros, I hope, because that's valid data indicating a 0. So on the Home tab, all the way on the right hand side, there is a find and select option. You can find stuff in a table, that's very useful, but actually I want to find and replace stuff, so I'm going to click on replace. You could also do Control H to get this, which I'm just going to do now. And you can see this option is turned up. So what you want to do is type into the find option what you want to find. I'm going to find all the instances of a double dot, and I'd like to replace it with nothing. Now I could actually, in some packages you might need to tell it what nothing looks like. I could put double quotes, so that's saying, like using your fingers as quotes, replace it with nothing. Excel works fine just to leave it as a blank in there. So it's going to find all the double dots and replace them with nothing. Let's see how that happens first. If I click on replace, you can see that cell there, which did have a double dot in it, is now blank. And if I find the next one, is to replace that one, and I can keep clicking through them, or if I trust that it's doing what I want it to do, I can click replace all, and it's going to do all of this. This is dangerous. If you could end up replacing stuff you don't expect to if there's a double dot written somewhere else where you didn't want it to get replaced, it will replace it. But if you are confident that you know what you're doing, clicking replace all, although nerve-wracking, is pretty quick. And it tells me it's made 286 replacements, and it's told me it's all done. Thanks, Excel. What's good, though, if I close this, I can see all the empty cells are in fact now empty. And even better than that, looking over at my graph, the graph has changed already. I can see this chart no longer has these funny ups and downs dips. It does have some gaps in there, and that's because in our select data option, you can see that it's programmed to show empty cells as gaps. That is what it's doing at the moment, which is why there is a gap in the career data. There's also something odd happened with Germany. There was a result in here before, but it appears to have vanished now. We're going to have to talk about that. But that's one bit of data cleaning up. I've changed the empty cells to make them actually empty cells so that Excel knows how to deal with them. Complicated, but important.